This is the Commonwealth, where we talk with the unique people blazing their own trail. We have some very exciting news that the Commonwealth is joining the Hurrdat Media Network. Hurrdat Media is a network of about 50 podcasts that cover a range of topics from sports, celebrity gossip, to business. Head on over to hurrdatmedia.com to check out some of these new shows. One of these podcasts is The 4 Elephant Show. Our guest today is the host of that show, Dr. Kari Morfeld. Kari is an African elephant conservationist from Omaha, Nebraska. She started a nonprofit called 4 Elephants that is devoted to saving elephants around the world. Enjoy our conversation with Dr. Kari Morfeld.
What's your solution? Because I think at the end of the day, we all care. We all care about individual elephants.
Kari, first question, I guess, that you just kind of touched on. What is your thoughts on elephants in zoos?
Yeah. You're going to just dive right in there.
Yes, yeah.
My thought always is individuals matter. Individual elephants, right?
Okay.
So I feel like zoos have been in existence for a long time, right? And people that managed elephants, cared for elephants, did what they did, knowing what they knew then, right?
Okay.
And slowly, as we learned more about elephants, and natural history of elephants, behavior of elephants in the wild, starting to realize things weren't exactly done right for the animals we care for. And that's a hard thing to swallow from people that, you know, have dedicated their lives to these caring for these species. And I understand that. So how I feel about elephants in zoos is some do it really, really well. Some do it really poor. But what I feel like is zoos can do it well. I feel like there needs to be less zoos with elephants and more places that have more elephants, right? So we can have the same number of elephants, but zoos shouldn't have 2 or 3 or 4 elephants. They should combine efforts to have 8 to 12 elephants, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, most definitely.
So I feel about elephants in zoos is they've always existed. They will continue to exist, but we need to do better in providing a more socially rounded situation for them to live in.
Okay.
And I feel like we know enough about that now that it's time to take some major leaps in changes, because we're seeing this slow slope of, more deaths and births. Poor reproduction rates are going up. So we're seeing what we're doing isn't working, right? So it's time to stop, look at ourselves in the mirror, right? And make some drastic changes. We know what needs to be done, but now it's, kind of putting the past in the past and taking some major leaps. So I think zoos are awesome in a lot of ways, and I think they also provide an avenue for science and research, but we need to make some drastic changes.
Yes, yeah. It also gives opportunities for kids to see an elephant and then care more about an elephant because they saw it at the zoo.
Yeah. Absolutely. But saying that, you want a kid to see an elephant doing natural things. Right? That elephant dancing in the corner is a stereotypic negative behavior, typically. That swaying you see.
Okay, yes.
So I'm just saying, we want to teach children and kids and adults about elephants, but it's not just seeing it and walking by, right? It's sitting there watching an elephant interact with other elephants, because in the wild, that's what they do. They're interacting, they're socializing, they're so loud. It's amazing. So I want kids and everybody to experience that from a zoo, and not just saying that's an elephant, right? There's a difference.
Yes.
Really connecting to what an elephant does versus that's just an elephant.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Have you seen Tiger King, the Netflix documentary?
I knew you were going to ask this because everybody asks this.
Yes.
And I have not.
You have not. Okay.
Right. Can you believe that?
Yes, yeah. You're one of the handful of Americans who did not watch it when quarantine first hit. So that documentary highlighted the private zoos and how they mistreat tigers. Is there a similar issue with elephants, or is that specific to that one species?
I know that can relate to any species in human care. Right? I think it's really naive of us to just think that's a one species thing. It's not just tigers. Okay. And I know enough about it, but to be honest, I'm crazy busy doing my thing that I already know the premise of it, and I didn't need to see it, and it doesn't resonate with me well. I'll watch it just because everybody asks me. But that doesn't sit with me well, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's a theme that I I think happens in a lot of species.
Yes, yeah, of course. All right, so now, like, I guess backing up the bus, Kari, how did you get into elephants from Nebraska? Because you're, you were an elephant conservationist.
How does one do that?
Yes.
And I do work with, like, I have a program in Africa as well. So it's interesting, right, how you can be, I'm from a small farming community of 200 people. Right. Mm-hmm. And how does one then dedicate their lives to studying elephants?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So I have to say, complete step-by-step trust in my next step and what God had planned for me, even though it seems wildly impossible from Nebraska, but just doing it, even amongst like a noisy world, right? At the end of the day, because I've tried, from child, I love nature and wildlife, and I thought I was going to be a photographer for National Geographic.
Okay.
Like every kid, right?
Yes, yeah.
If you're going to work for wildlife, it's going to be that, right?
Yeah.
But I knew it was different. And I loved the sciences. I loved conservation. I went down that route of maybe I'll go to medical school because clearly I love to connect with people as well. And then just that feeling of like, that's just not right. Like I meant to do something with wildlife, endangered species. And, I ended up doing an internship at the Omaha's Henry Doorly Zoo when I was an undergrad. And
one of the best zoos in the world.
And it opened my eyes. So in the reproductive biology department, it opened my eyes to this new area of how zoos could be so powerful in impacting wildlife in human care, but also in the wild. And so I did that for 5 years. I did my master's at the same time. But the more I learned, the more I realized I wanted to change, right? I wish I could just be content, but I'm just never am. Yeah. And so, I did that. And then I was suggested, you really need to go get your PhD if you want to have more of a say in changing some policies and all of that. Okay. I was like, well, no, because they said go to the Smithsonian because they have the best program for this type of thing. And the Smithsonian is in Washington, D.C. I'm from Nebraska. And I was like, I've traveled a lot, but I was like, no, I'm good. I'm comfortable. I bet I can do it from here. And kind of always wanted to, but didn't do it. Then I worked in animal biotech for a while, and it just that feeling got stronger. And I'm like, I feel like I need to do this because I feel like I have a mission to bring to this world. And so, I quit my job and packed up my cats and my car, and I drove out to the Smithsonian to volunteer for a year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, right? I didn't have a job. I mean, I waitressed, right? So I made sure, because, I didn't have money either. So enough gas to get there. But this woman there that, is one of the best in studying endangered wildlife and reproductive issues and conservation. She said, of course, I'd love your help, but it's not paid. Come see if you're a good fit. Dang. So I was like, here I come. So I headed out there on a whim of faith and a huge leap. Waved to my parents in the driveway, and I'm thinking, what in the world, But they also knew I was super, on a mission to do this. Yeah. So it started there, taking that leap, and worked in that lab and that environment, and it just fed my soul. And I knew hey, there's something here. She offered me, that woman, Dr. Janine Brown, offered me a spot to do a PhD with her to study issues with reproductive issues in elephants. And without knowing a whole lot of what I was getting into, I say yes and then figure out the details later. So I did that. And it ended up now I've been doing that for 20 years, so I did my PhD out there, studied elephants. But then being a Nebraska girl, I wanted to come back to Nebraska for a few reasons. I had a daughter, so I wanted to raise her in Nebraska. Okay. And I knew that there was just something I wanted to bring back to Nebraska, because I felt when I was here, I couldn't study this anywhere but the Smithsonian. Why not? Right? Why can't we do things for endangered wildlife in Africa from Nebraska? Why not? So I wanted to pave a new path for people like me that maybe don't fit the standard mold of what's offered here, and lead that path for them. So now, I've developed graduate programs for students to work with me, do a ton of internships, and so I'm trying to give back and build something greater than myself. And so I continue to do that.
Wow. It's an inspiring story. So yeah, very cool, Kari. Yes. So you talked about getting in your car and leaving your parents behind. What were your friends and family supportive of the kind of oddball career decision?
Yes and no. You can probably hear my hesitation.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, because they know when I'm committed to something, like I'm gonna see it through. And if it doesn't work out, like I think the worst thing for anybody is to have something that you feel strongly about and you never even try. I think that would be the biggest, like, regret like that is something that you can't live with, right? So I think go all in. If it doesn't work, dang, you learned a lot trying, right? And so they knew that about me. So my sister, so I had a younger sister, she actually drove out with me, which is really funny.
Yes.
So my sister, Callie, so she drove out with me and then was going to fly back, right? Because it's 20-something hours.
Yes.
And yeah. So she drove out with me and we got there late and it was dark. And the place I was staying, keep in mind that I had a cat, right? 2 cats. And I'm a fairly, passionate animal person.
Yes.
So there's only a few places you can stay with cats in Front Royal, Virginia. So this place was in the mountains and really hidden, and we couldn't find it. And we get there, and my sister's like, I cannot leave you here. We are driving back to Nebraska right now. And so it happened to be I couldn't get into the house. The people weren't there. So we got a hotel for the night, which also wasn't a good experience. But the next morning, I'm like, I'm staying. I committed. So I, took my sister to the airport. She went on her way, and but it was funny. So, she was trying to, protect me, but same thing. And to this day, she's one of my biggest supporters. So, but yeah, just funny, right?
Yes, yeah.
How nothing is ever just like an easy path, right?
Yes, yeah.
No.
And I'm sure that's not the report your parents wanted to hear back.
I don't think we even told them. No. It was great. It was perfect. No.
So how did you land on elephants? Was that just like the program opened up at the Smithsonian that was the conservation program?
Sure.
wanted?
Yeah. So a few things. So again, since I was young, really in high school, I wanted to work with African wildlife, right?
Okay.
I don't know. Just was. And when I was at Omaha Zoo, I did a lot with cheetah and tigers and gorillas, but not a lot with elephants. I did some with elephants. But then when I got to the Smithsonian, it happened to be because this woman was the expert in elephants. I love big open-ended projects and questions, right?
Okay.
So really I wanted to study something that had a need. And the question was, why are reproductive rates in zoo elephants so low and going down every year, like drastically? And to me, like that big open-ended question, right, was just like I just latched onto that. And I was like, yes, I want to figure that out, right?
Okay.
Because if you have continuous high rates of poor reproduction, right, eventually that species is going to go extinct. So we did all the modeling that said elephants in zoos were going to be extinct in 50 years at that time. And that just wasn't okay with me, right? Like, at all.
Yeah.
Like, why weren't more people studying this? Like, that's not very long. Like, in my lifetime, if I knew this and did nothing about it, shame on me.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, she said it, and, like, there was just, like, I want to do that. There's no turning back. But then, because, none of this path was straight and narrow at all, the scholarship that was opened up for me to be able to do this, they just stopped that program, like, right when I was going to start. Right?
Oh my gosh, that's
like,
unfortunate.
seriously,
Yes.
right? Like,
Bad timing,
I'm just trying to save some elephants here. But then, I was like, well, I'm here. I've committed to it. I feel like, for whatever reason, like, this is what my gut's telling me. And so, I paid for my PhD and stuff by waitressing and teaching at community colleges. So I did both, until I could get enough grants to support what I was doing. But
Wow.
yeah, so it opened up. Studying elephants was because, I always thought there was something with African wildlife and things I wanted to study. I'd been to Africa, really connected with elephants. And then when she brought up this project, it was just like all in alignment,
Yes, yeah. Is there a way to quantify how much lower the reproductive rate in zoos is compared to the wild? As someone who does not study elephants, is there an easy
this
number?
Isn't just common knowledge, right?
Yes.
So in the wild population, elephants actually will breed, are capable of having calves. So calves are the babies until their 50s, right?
Okay.
So throughout their lifetime. So they don't have reproductive issues. So they're either, so they have a calf typically every 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
Pregnancy is 2 years long, right?
Wow.
So they're pregnant for 2 years. They nurse their calf for about 2 years and pregnant again. So they're constantly having calves or pregnant or nursing, right? So it's on that cycle. No known reproductive issues that we've ever witnessed or documented.
Okay,
right?
and this is in the wild?
This is in the wild.
Okay.
Yep. When you go to the zoo population, so we study reproductive cycles. So like just like a human has a reproductive cycle of about a month, right? So capable of pregnancy 12 times a year, right?
Okay.
So in the lab, through endocrinology, the study of hormones, we are able to profile the hormone profiles for every elephant in North American zoos.
Okay.
And find out, so an elephant cycle is about 3 months long. So 12 by 3, so they can be capable of pregnancy about 4 times a year, right?
Okay.
If they cycle normally.
Okay.
But what we see in the zoo population is the rates of an elephant not even having a cycle, so completely, it's called a flat line, so not even capable of conceiving, is about 45%. So about half of reproductive aged female elephants don't even have a reproductive cycle. So no cycle means no baby.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so that rate increased by 11% in just 7 years. And we haven't done the recent. But that just showing you how drastic the number of non-cycling, non-reproductively viable females in zoos is just going up, right? No cycles, no babies.
Yes.
Yeah. So complete difference, right, from wild and zoo population.
Yes, a complete difference. And I know this next question is like what you're devoting your life to, but can we begin to understand why?
Oh, that is right what I'm devoting my life to, in one sentence. So we are understanding why, which is good, right? The first part is just like, okay, here's where we are, and then are there key things promoting that? If you know what those are, that's what we fix, right? It's not, it seems so complicated. We like to overcomplicate things, right? But really, so what we found, so a lot of my PhD work was looking at obesity in elephants.
Okay.
So nobody's ever thought of obese elephants, right? Elephants are supposed to be huge, round, gray, right?
Yes.
And so a previous researcher had looked at all these different things in a zoo environment, like weather and their care providers, if they were male or female. And they also did this, what we're used to is the body mass index, which is a ratio of like your height to like waist circumference, right? She did that, and it showed a strong relationship to an elephant not capable of conceiving, right? Those like flatliners that I talked about.
Yes.
But it didn't include the whole population, and it's really hard to get a tape measure around an elephant. So it wasn't so it wasn't a practical approach. So I tried that, right? And elephants tend to like to eat tape measures as well. So that didn't go well. And so then I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, and from my work in Africa, I knew visually that the zoo population of elephants were overweight. But how do I scientifically prove that? And then how do I study that in relationship to reproduction? So because I grew up in Nebraska and I knew a lot about animal science, that was my master's, I knew what visual scoring indexes to look at. They call it body condition, which just means obesity. But I got in trouble for calling elephants fat once at the Smithsonian because that's not cool to say anything's fat, right?
Okay.
I guess not.
Yeah, I guess not.
I guess not.
Yeah.
So I had to go through communications training to learn to say just body condition.
Okay.
So anyway, if I overuse that term,
that is why.
That is why. So I went through training to say nothing's fat. So it's an index of like 1 to 5. 1 is like really skinny and 5 is obese. Right?
Okay.
And so I took a ton of photos of elephants to find out like where they put on this body fat, right? In zoos. And sure enough, I was getting all of the same photos because primarily the zoo elephants were all overweight. So that's when I started doing a lot of my work in Africa because I wanted to know what elephants looked like in the wild, right?
Okay.
So I started seeing backbones and pelvic bones and into like people in the U.S. and even zoo elephant management that was like, that's a really skinny elephant. Actually, that turns out to be what an elephant should look like. So anyway, so I came up with this index of a 1 to 5 scoring where 5 is obese, 3 is ideal, and 1 is thin. And so I did that. And I didn't just make it and said, like, Kari thinks that's elephants of 4. So I had to put science behind it, right?
Yes, of course.
So I had this ultrasound machine that could monitor like fat depth, right? So I went to all the elephants and the different spots they put on fat and measured, like got a depth of that fat layer. So basically it was giving like a scientific meaning to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
So at the end of it, sure enough, 75% of our zoo elephants were either 4 or 5, which means overweight or obese. The crazy thing, Nick, is that obesity rates in elephants and zoos line up perfectly with obesity rates of humans and our cats and dogs, which is about 30%. Crazy, right?
Yes, yeah.
So we're treating them like companion animals.
Yeah, okay. And I'm interested in every aspect of the fact that like the cats and dogs are similar to humans, and then also elephants are similar.
Right?
Yes, yeah, okay.
I mean, that's
mind-blowing.
mind-blowing,
Yes.
right? But then it was this whole thing of like, okay, did the science define this? And then sure enough, elephants that had a body condition score of 5, like the highest, were 3 times more likely not to have a normal reproductive cycle.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So click, hey, let's lose that weight and see if it triggers their reproductive cycle, right? And even more important, let's prevent that weight in our younger elephants to begin with, so they continue to have a cycle throughout their lives, right?
Yes.
So so that was a lot of my work of looking at obesity, and we call it metabolic issues. So I do a lot of hormone work. So I did the same thing like in humans, insulin and glucose, right? Those common hormones we think in terms of fat and sugar intake. So I developed different techniques that we could test those levels in elephants as well. And sure enough, the elephants with those obesity levels visually had, those high insulin glucose ratios and those levels as well.
Okay.
So it's really fascinating to see. It wasn't just a visual look. Internally, there were things going on that also, of course, at the end of the day, were messing up their reproductive cycles. Yeah. But then the cool thing, what do you think is the most common body condition score in the elephants in the wild? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
3, 2.
2.
Okay.
Yeah, good job, Nick.
Thank
You're
you.
listening.
Thank you. Where in Africa do you do research?
South Africa.
Okay.
So it's all of, even into a little bit of Zimbabwe and Mozambique, but this is just outside of Kruger National Park.
Okay.
So it's one of the largest elephant populations in Africa. But the group I work with is called Elephants Alive. They are fantastic. So this woman has dedicated her lives to studying elephants and how they use their habitat and their movements. So their movements and where they move and why they move. And so to do that, they put these huge GPS collars around their neck, right? So they can track them via satellite.
Okay.
And then they can monitor their movements. So I met with her and I was like, wow, you have known individuals, right? And so I work with her because they actually collect, I can get the hormones out of their poop samples, right?
Okay.
So I know, right?
That's a fun job.
That's a fun job.
Yeah.
Blood or poop, but wild elephants aren't trained for blood draws.
Okay.
So their team collects fecal samples from these elephants weekly and takes photos as well. So now we can monitor, obesity rates, metabolic hormones, stress hormones in these known individuals over time. So it's this amazing partnership where we're finally learning. And my goal is to use this information from our wild population so we have new standards of care for our zoo populations, right? And that's always the question is what is it in the wild, right? Well, now we know. And so if it's this far off between the two, we need to bridge that gap. Right? Start making changes to how we feed, what we feed, and maybe that will help reproduction. And we're seeing that. So
okay, yeah, and how far down are you on that path?
It's exhausting.
Yes, yeah.
I guess the hardest part was one of the hardest parts was doing this study and being in the room with everybody that cares for elephants and showing them the results. Hey, 75% of your elephants are fat, and I'm ready for them to throw things at me. Nobody wants to be I have the fat elephant, right?
Yeah.
Turned out nobody was surprised, which is refreshing. But it was more of okay, this is where we are now. Okay, what do we do to change that? So it was really awesome. It was this moment of understanding, right? So that was huge for me, knowing that this community wants to do right. It's not going to be selling them hey, this and this, like, okay, we get it. We never knew we should see a backbone in an elephant. Now we know. So now what? And I thought that was an amazing next step, right? So, but then it turned out to be like, what do we do, right? You don't starve an elephant. Oh my goodness. Like elephants eat 18, 20 hours a day, right? So of course, what do? You feed them less high quality, right? So they're not getting as much sugar and protein. They don't need that high quality alfalfa. I don't know. I'm Nebraska talking now. Okay. So alfalfa is like, it's like having like, the pizza and all of that instead of sometimes having like chicken in a salad, right? So it's like having like that really rich food all of the time, right? They don't need that. If you look at our wild population, there's periods of drought. There's dry season, right? So we need to actually not restrict their food, but give them less quality, but more often. So this was a tricky part too, right? Yes. But again, zoos are amazing. Okay, let's do that. Let's see if the elephants act out or like, hey, where's my alfalfa? But really, there weren't behavior issues with it. Like they just like the process of eating. It's not so much what they eat. Of course, they have their favorites and we still use them for certain training and behaviors. But overall, like they just like that process. That's their natural history, is that process of eating.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there, I guess, enough data to see if that has changed the reproductive cycles yet? No.
Just not reversing. So what I'm trying to do now is to really do that in reverse. So those that are like we're non-cycling in fat, to reduce that fat to see if they resume, cycling again. We're not seeing that yet, but it hasn't been that long either. I'm taking a more proactive approach to elephants that are young, that are cycling normally, to prevent putting on that body fat, because we know they have a potentially good reproductive history if we catch it early. So I have to say though, so there was a group of 17 elephants imported from Africa in 2016, and I've been monitoring and studying and working with those elephants since they got here, like on the ground. I was a huge pain and like getting everybody to be like, let me study them. Let's like be on the ball so that we're not in this situation with this group again. Like, shame on us if we don't take what we've learned and apply it to these 17 elephants coming in, right? And it's also been a bit annoying in a way, I'm not going to lie, of me having to do endless grants and fundraising and stuff to do this. Like, this should be something zoos commit to. Okay, so that's a whole nother thing that we're getting to. And some have been really great about like, yes, we're committed to doing right by these animals. Some aren't there. So so we've been studying that group, and they have been so aware and working with me constantly of like, are we putting on fat too quick? Because they were, right? And I'm like, whoa, hold on, hold on. So they've been fantastic about controlling weight, feeding. So we're doing feedings 24/7. So now they're fed around the clock, but not as much at one time. So anyway.
Yes, yeah. So
it's a lot. So
So then going into the funding component of it. So how do zoos traditionally get funding? Like I'm sure a portion of the revenue is ticket sales, but then private donors. And I'm like, I love the Henry Dorley Zoo and try to go once a summer, and I'm basing that solely off my experience there. How do zoos traditionally receive funding, and then how would that like this incorporate into that?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question, and you pretty much got it right from saying admission. So it's people and members that come to the zoo, and it's donations. The hard part is not many zoos have dedicated like research or conservation facilities, which is crazy, right? This is also a thing that needs to change, is because that's the messaging, right? We're here for conservation, but many don't even have a conservation or research group. And within that group, if there is a group at the zoo, they're responsible for, the day-to-day management of the animals research-wise, but also writing the grants. So it's a lot of grant funding. But we're also very limited to what grants are out there, because you have all, like, for example, 68 zoos that have African elephants. You're all competing for that same 2 grants, right? So I've been more successful in what I've been doing. In seeing this problem, I knew that I couldn't do my part by just solely relying on grants. And that's hard because that's how most people that work with wildlife have to function.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew how quickly elephants needed help. I knew if I wrote a grant today, and then it took a year to find out if it was funded, and then another year I'm like, we are past the point of doing what we should have been doing a year ago, right? So I changed my approach to how to fund this, which is why I started a nonprofit.
Okay.
Because I knew I needed to have more flexibility in providing care for that elephant that needed me that day. Didn't wait for 2 years, didn't rely on me having 30 animals to have a right sample size. We still do all that, but I needed the ability to, like, if that zoo or that keeper or that elephant needed my help, I needed to be able to pivot and help based on what I knew while building the science at the same time. So instead, because, my postdoc, all of that was grant funded. And then I was like, this needs to be more direct. And so, private donations, people that really care about this, that want to contribute to having something like this that's powerful, that stirs the water a little bit, and I always say, and it goes against science to say, typically science, you have to have like 90% confidence in your results, blah, 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 blah. I'm telling zoos, you have to be okay with 80%. You have to live in that area of not having all of the data in the world to support this, but just know by what we do have, and know if you don't do something, this is what's going to happen. So mine's all now donations, events, but with COVID, that's been a severe setback.
Yes.
So it's hard, but most zoos run off of. That's why also these species don't get the attention that they need, because, and to none of their faults. But that has to change as well. There has to be more direct funding avenues for scientists and researchers to get in there and make real change, applied change. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to set a new movement of how we work with animals and wildlife from the inside out. Like working with people that actually work with elephants. Like I can't sit in my desk in my lab and be like, this would be great, but it's not practical. Like, come on now. So I spend time in the zoos and, scooping poop and like being in there. Like I could recommend something, but that means nothing if it's not practical.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that, and it's having the funding to do that. And it's tough. It's tough because people also want to fund things, not people. Right? So it's hard. Like nobody wants to say like, hey, half this donation is going to support a position for Kari, right? No. I'll support, but 100% have to go to supplies. That's also a misconception, is because what's behind the supplies is people implementing them, right? But that's a really tough thing, if you have great ideas, Nick. But that's a common thing in conservation, is that it's for free, right? So trying to change that mindset of, you might be giving to people, but you might be giving to training people at these zoos, to training, like making it a movement where people are giving to something that's bigger than a hay net, right? Like it's a whole program. It's not just a thing, because that's where the magic happens, right?
Yes.
Is that implementation.
Yeah. So now moving, I guess, to elephant conservation, like in the wild.
Yeah.
I was doing research on the World Wildlife Fund beforehand, that the three biggest threats to elephants in the wild are climate change, clashes with farmers, and poachers. And the numbers are falling broadly. Yeah. But there is some success in Southern Africa. What is working in the places that it is working?
Yeah. What is working is community involvement. It's and I hate to say education. It's not going in and preaching like, these are your elephants, save them, because it's education in a way of understanding how humans and elephants can live together. It's involving communities in their protection. It's involving communities in understanding how unique and amazing it is to live. Like it's different, like it's education. It's also education for us. It's a really naive thing just to think, oh, just go tell them that elephants are fine. No, because sometimes elephants are dangerous, right? Sometimes males go into must, which is this high testosterone period. it's educating them to be able to recognize a dangerous elephant versus this elephant coming through because their field is full of produce and come on, elephants like to eat. So it's understanding what a dangerous elephant might look like, but more of than having the resources of what do we do about this? Who do we call? Having that infrastructure for conservation or wildlife management to work with communities on either deterring elephants. So many times that group I work with, Elephants Alive, gets called because the elephants are approaching into communities. So the team goes and deters the elephant. Sometimes they can just deter it physically. Sometimes they actually have to dart it, and relocate it. Typically not. But it's that, having those people you can call, right? So community, involving the community about resources to help with conflict. But then also like involving them in their research, hiring local people. Like it's making it, the poaching issue is just devastating, right? Like we don't understand how people could do that. But also when it comes to some people, that's the only way they feed their family. It's hard to be in that spot, right? But what if hiring those people that are internal to that to more wildlife management, right? So it's providing jobs. If there's a way to provide for their families that's not killing elephants, I think they would do it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's that. And that's not an easy solution.
Yeah. So on the poaching aspect, where does the ivory go? So like, are there people out there in the world that want the tusk above their mantle?
Yep. There still are, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are. And you've probably seen the numbers of certain areas in the world. China, the U.S. is one of the biggest importers of ivory. That's not talked about a lot.
Okay.
But yeah, so a lot of times it's mostly out of country imports for money. A lot of times for status and decor. No medicinal value to it. It's, like you said, something above a fireplace. How devastating is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And that's the good news, right? How do you stop that besides strict policy and people on the ground physically stopping that, right? And stopping borders. And really it starts at, the policy of not allowing trade of ivory. CITES things, like big level things that say this isn't permissible. When you stop, the permission for it, of course you have to stop the demand for it, right? And that's the education component as well. So there's many facets. There's a legal aspect, and then there's the education aspect.
What do you think? How does hunting play into this?
Yeah.
From like a Midwest perspective.
Sure.
Yeah.
From a Midwest perspective, and my uncles are like avid hunters, and
Yeah.
right.
I also come from the hunting family, and do you remember the dentist a few years ago who shot a lion, and then that like brought that surfaced the whole debate to the national stage. So how does hunting play a role in wildlife conservation?
Yep, and it has a role, right? Just like it has a role here for population management, right? And that's hard sometimes to compare directly because you think elephant, mega species, charismatic, and so it's hard to think of, right? But there are certain areas, and I would never promote. Poaching is way different than controlled hunting.
Yes.
Now, would I rather transfer an elephant than be okay with hunting it? Absolutely. But does it exist? Absolutely, it does. So there's some permits you can get in certain areas if population numbers are too high, which seems crazy. But you also have to think of isolated populations, right? Sometimes, even in Africa, these are fenced in areas, huge fenced in areas. But whether it's a fence or barriers due to cities or whatever, sometimes elephant populations grow really, really fast. And so in that time, they will allow certain permits to hunt an elephant. Now, could I ever do it? Nope. Not even if I felt like it was an overpopulation situation. And in alignment with that, I'm actually working with this group on elephant vasectomy. So now we can actually go in and vasectomize those males. So that provides a longer term solution to control population numbers. So that's a whole nother, right?
Yes,
that's actually been very successful. So how do I feel about it? I don't like the idea of hunting elephants. I don't. I think there's other things we can do. do I think it's going to exist until we find a different way to control numbers in areas where there's encroachment on humans? Yeah, it's going to exist. I know that's not a great answer. Could I ever do it? No. Would I ever fully be in support of it? Not unless all other measures have been taken.
Okay.
Just because I can't. Yeah, you're talking to a conservationist,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
I couldn't go to vet school because I didn't want to have to put animals down. So I'm always in the favor. I'm always in the favor of ways that promote life, especially, a lot of times they say, well, it's going to be the oldest ones in the herd. But sometimes it's that wisdom of that oldest that is so important, right? And what a magnificent creature to I don't know who could do that, permit or not. There's other ways. I mean, just how elephants are socially, involved with each other in that group. I just think that it's just a disservice to our planet, to elephants, to whole social structure. I think there's other ways, like vasectomy in elephants. Yeah, a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. So I have 2 to 3 more questions. And this one requires some framing. That
here we go.
Yeah, and we touched on the ways that the things that I'm sure frustrate you operating in your career. And there's things, regardless of what you do, there's things about the job or the industry that are frustrating.
Yeah.
When you get frustrated, is there a piece of advice or something you do to continue to pursue your passion with the type of vigor you have?
Yeah. So that's a daily, as you probably heard me talk, a lot of different frustrating, I think, areas, but I guess I don't look at them as frustrating so much as what's my role in changing this. And that's a big mission. Because there are a lot of people that feel hey, don't be doing this too fast. You shouldn't be doing this. And I'm if I'm not, who will? Right? If I'm not willing, which is part of me starting an organization so I can be upfront about things. So I don't have to go through communications training, right? Sometimes you have to be able, and in the most polite way. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't feel like I had to. There is, and I am Christian and I do believe in God. And that's, I think, part of giving me that courage and to overcome any frustration when I feel hey, should I just shut up and just go do something else? There's no way I could. That voice is so loud that says, hey, that person might look at it this way and said something negative, but that other person, they need you. They don't have the platform or whatever to have their voice heard. That elephant that might never get attention, not reproductive, too old, you could help that elephant, right? Even if you don't help the 400,000 in Africa, what about that one? Is that okay? And I can't say no to that. Yeah. So when I get frustrated, I think of the small pieces, the people that do need my help, the elephants that need my help, the people that do support this. And, if we all felt that way all the time, we wouldn't be in the spot, right?
Yes.
So it takes some strong willpower, just doing the right thing, doing good science, getting it out there, at the same time being humble, but going on with your mission, right? It's not going to be easy. It's never been easy, but I don't know. I don't plan on stopping. So
yes, yeah.
So that's how I handle it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I like the answer. All right. Kari,
it passes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So Kari, last question for you. I always have cared about elephants. I had growing up, we had a foreign exchange student from Thailand. When I was in the third grade. Yes. Yeah. So I when I was in the third grade, was obsessed over elephants. But a lot of people like that don't devote their whole lives to the science and conservation how can someone stay connected to conservation efforts by not devoting their life to science and kind of from the outside?
Yeah. A few things. And number one is just being aware of educating yourself. Everybody thinks, oh, okay, what can I do in Africa to go save this elephant? What can I do? Well, if it was that easy, that would have been done, right?
Yeah.
So, number one, stop putting that pressure on yourself that you have to save the world. I'm not putting that pressure on myself. I'm going to do my small piece, right?
Okay.
So everybody can do their small piece. But number one, educating themselves. Like, be aware of it. What's your closest zoo? Do they have elephants? Have you gone and sat there? Or any species? Pick a species that you care about. What do you actually know about them that's not on TV? TV, Netflix, whatever. If people don't watch TV. Where have you sat and watched? Ask yourself that, right? Or what are the 3 closest zoos of my favorite species? Do I even know that? If you can't act locally, it's really hard to act globally, right? So be where you are. So my advice is educate yourself where you are. Ask yourself some questions. Go figure out the answer. And then, of course, contribute to organizations that are doing this work. So we have this program called Herd of Heroes, right? $15 a month, you contribute to what we're doing. And I'm disappointed that it's not like taking off as it should, because people are like, what do I get? A badge? A stuffy? You know? And I'm like, this is about giving something bigger than yourself, not knowing, you might not get a certificate, you might not. But this is a way of contributing to something bigger, right? A bigger way of thinking, a bigger way, and just motivating, especially, I'm big on teaching kids to follow their passion, to follow what they're supposed to do, even if it's not conventional. It's about that too, right? So it's having the courage to do that. So yeah, educate yourself, go local, share, right? Share with other people what you've learned, share with other people's stories, of what other people are doing, and contribute, right? That's where it starts. And then you might fall in love with some area of that and realize, I might be able to make a career out of that. What does that look like? And then you call me and I'll help you.
Yeah. So Kari, if our listeners wanted to learn more about your work, where can they go find? Sure.
So 2 different places. So the nonprofit I run is called 4 Elephants. Our website is 4elephants.org. So there's all about our science, our outreach, how you can actually come to Africa and experience elephants in the wild with me, which is pretty fun.
I can believe it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then also just karimorfeld.com. So I have a website that does more of the speaking, inspiring students and people just to believe in yourself. You ask advice. I would say don't give up on yourself. It's a noisy world. You'll get a lot of noisiness of what you should be doing from the outside, but really just digging in to do what you should be doing from the inside, and you can't go wrong. So those 2 places.
Yes. Well, Kari, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nick, for having me.
Yes, of course.
The quiz on elephants to follow. No, just kidding.